Hey everyone, I'm Ashleigh Banfield, and this is Drop Dead Serious. It took a 17-year-old guy from Canada who is a rising senior in high school to put Chris Nanos, the sheriff of Pima County in Arizona, to the test, and to make some very big headlines in the Savannah Guthrie, Nancy Guthrie missing persons case. Sheriff Nanos hasn't granted a lot of interviews, and certainly very few to the major networks and the big podcasts of late. We are 6 months into the case of Nancy Guthrie with still no answers, no leads certainly that have been made public, and no solutions as to where she is and where Porch Guy is. But there's so many questions, right, still afoot. And looking back all these months, a lot of questions about maybe there have been some missteps along the way. And this young man named Wyatt Sharp asked those questions. So first and foremost, you should know, I've known Wyatt Sharp since he was about 12, because Wyatt Sharp reached out to me and asked if he could interview me, and said, I have a YouTube show and I interview, big name people like the Prime Minister of Canada. And I thought, who is this kid? And I clicked a link and I watched his show and I thought, this is a really smart 12-year-old kid. I'm doing this interview. And since then, I've helped Wyatt Sharp along in navigating his career. And boy, what a career it is. If you've ever seen his show, it's called the Sharpe Exchange. Highly advise that you check it out and then subscribe. He's just a really brilliant interviewer. And I'm not going to say kid. He's actually one of the smarter journalists I know, and has been for years. He's a prodigy. Honest to God, wait for it. We're all going to work for Wyatt one year. But I will say this, he scored the interview with Sheriff Chris Nanos, and he asked a lot of really pointed questions that I think the sheriff might not have been expecting, because there were big, long pauses in many of the answers that the sheriff was. I think maybe the sheriff thought, it's a high school project, this will be a breeze. Not so. This was a tough interview, and Wyatt made some very big headlines. Like headline number one, Wyatt was able to assess how Chris Nanos, the sheriff of Pima County, feels about the FBI Director Kash Patel, and he was highly critical. Listen to this exchange between Wyatt and Sheriff Chris Nanos.
Well, I don't know the FBI director. Never met him. So my relationship is what we see or hear as you do, right, on the news.
Okay, so there you have it. That's a rift, and a bit shocking that the sheriff has not spoken with the FBI director, because this is a really high-profile case, right? Really high-profile case. The FBI director's been in Tucson, met with this team. There's this joint task force between the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI. They've been working on this for 6 months, and the FBI director was there. And the president weighed in on this case. Hate to say, the president said like 6 months ago, we're real close to, resolving this. My words, not his, but no, that was not the case. And what the heck information was the president getting? And I only assume he was getting it from his FBI director. So what information did Kash Patel have from his field office? And why no communication between the homicide detectives from Pima County and the FBI field office agents? This is nuts to me, but great headline that Wyatt scored. And not only that, he was able to say that the core group of investigators is still the same. I've been wondering how long it's going to take for it to dissipate, but at least Chris Nanos said that core group is still there. Here's how he put it.
But the core membership has been there from day one, and they continue to meet daily.
Huge headline that Wyatt was able to score as well with the sheriff of Pima County, and that was that, all this discussion about the unknown male DNA that was found inside the home of Nancy Guthrie, DNA that didn't belong to anybody, that Nancy had in her immediate circle, so maybe it's the killer / the kidnapper. Well, that was just this big hot mess. I mean, it went down to a very, very reputable lab in Florida. But then after that, we could get very little information about what are you doing with it? What's happening with that? All we heard was, well, it's a mixture and we got to separate it and it's a really tricky process. So like, no, come on. Lots of crime scenes have mixtures. And so this one did too. But the headline that Wyatt was able to get was that they are actually doing what we were thinking they might be doing. And that is forensic genetic genealogy. Fanning out to the tens, hundreds, or thousands of people that might share a little bit of that DNA and figuring out if they might have a connection to the person whose DNA it actually is. And that is a gumshoe detective process that could take months and years. And that is what the sheriff actually conceded and confirmed to Wyatt Sharp that that's the process they're in right now. Here's how he put it.
We're doing all of it. And
Okay.
that's really the labs are doing it all. They're looking at genealogy, but they're also looking at specific pieces of evidence that they're hoping to get enough codi to say, this is who we're looking at.
And then the big question. Wyatt asked Sheriff Nanos if he thinks that Nancy Guthrie is still alive. Listen to the answer, because I think this is very telling. Obviously, so many people think after 6 months, how could she possibly be alive? And we almost expect the sheriff to say that, but here's how he put it.
I believe that I'm going to support the Guthrie family every way possible. And if they believe she's alive, so do I.
And then the big question. I assume there's an open line of communication between Savannah Guthrie and her family and the Pima County Sheriff's Department through the sheriff himself. And Wyatt asked very pointedly, have you been speaking with Savannah? And the answer was pretty astounding. Apparently not. Have a listen.
Well, our relationship is a good relationship. I mean, these are tough times. But no, I've not spoken with Savannah recently. She has my contact number, as you and the rest of the world seems to have. But she's very gracious, and she doesn't need to contact the sheriff. She needs a team that she's very well aware of that works with her, and she's in contact with them at any moment of day, any time of day that she needs to.
So naturally, I wanted to ask, Wyatt about all the other questions that he asked Chris Nanos, and also what conducting this interview was like, and whether he thought that maybe he got this interview because the sheriff just thought he was some 17-year-old kid and doesn't know that he's this like prodigy who's one of the better journalists alive today. And so here's my conversation with Wyatt, and listen carefully because there's a lot of stuff that he touched on that we're going to talk about in this interview. You've heard me talk about OneSkin before, and what keeps standing out is that it doesn't feel like just another moisturizer added to my routine. It's the only one I use, and I've been using it for years. You don't even have to use much, and it just covers everything, and it's not greasy, and I love it, and so I'm sold. I just adore it. It actually works pretty differently because its OS1 peptide was designed by longevity scientists to target the aging skin cells linked to the fine lines, dullness, and the other visible signs of aging. Boo! And guess what? Summer's here. So their limited edition bundles are pairing OneSkin skincare with SPF so that you're helping address the visible effects of UV aging also while protecting your skin from new damage. OneSkin is backed by 4 peer-reviewed clinical studies and more than 10,000 5-star reviews. So yeah, it's good stuff. And for a limited time, guess what? I got you 15% off. You're welcome. Just use the code Banfield at oneskin.co/Banfield. Links in the description, but it is spelled ONESKIN.co and use the code Banfield. And by the way, please do me a solid. Tell them we sent you. Wyatt Sharp, good to have you on Drop Dead Serious. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much. Happy to.
So listen, first off, congratulations. That's a huge score, getting that interview with Sheriff Nanos, because a lot of people have been rebuffed by him lately. Were you surprised he said yes?
I was, just because I was looking at some of the more recent interviews that he had done, and before mine, the most recent one that he did was with KVOA, the local Tucson affiliate station. And so I thought to myself, obviously I'm going to ask because that's what you do as a journalist and as someone in the media. But I thought to myself, I'm going to do it and probably nothing's going to come of it because there's, hundreds, if not thousands of outlets around the world and, in the United States who are requesting interviews with him. Mm-hmm. And so I did it. And sure enough, he responded and said, yes, I'd be happy to, which, looking back on and reflecting on it, I'm sure was in part due to my age. Maybe he thought that being 17 years old, I probably would, scale myself back from some of the more difficult questions. But I think he might have been a little bit surprised with perhaps the magnitude of the questions that he got.
Well, and I'm going to get there because you did ask him something at the end of your interview, which I think is very telling how he answered it. We'll play that in a bit. But let's get to the headlines that really you were able to make in this interview.
Yeah.
He went after Kash Patel, the FBI director. So what did you ask and what did he say?
Yes, so Kash Patel did an interview on Fox News where he had claimed that if the FBI, the bureau that he oversees, had obtained access to the scene earlier, that they would have been able to help with more forensic evidence and kind of get more on-the-ground investigation done than if it was just the Pima County Sheriff's Department on their own, which Chris Nanos took almost offense to in a way. He said Kash Patel is misinformed. He said when Kash Patel goes out there and makes statements like the one that he did in that Fox News interview, it doesn't help anybody. He said it hurts the case, was his words. So definitely a lot of, I think, frustration between them. And the most interesting part to me that I thought was very puzzling was he said that he has never spoken to the FBI Director Kash Patel, which if you're having this public back and forth in the media, what sense does it make to not call the person who is overseeing the investigation, not just any other case, but one that has captivated the nation, if not the world?
Well, and that, Kash Patel's boss weighed in on early. I remember him on Air Force One saying, oh, we're close. We're close to getting some kind of resolution. Those are my words, not President Trump's. But I recall thinking, well, clearly the president has spoken with the FBI director, and the FBI director must be dialed in on the ground in Tucson. So it is astounding to think that they've never spoken.
Yeah, totally. And I think for me, there was a certain part of me when I was asking that question, right, that I was like, he might just say and take the approach, which he did, that it's unorthodox for the FBI director to be involved in a direct case, right, with the local sheriff's department. But my pushback on that was, yeah, but sir, it's not any other case, right? This does not get the same parameters that any other case does. You have thousands of leads, which does not happen with cases that aren't in the public eye. You have, different ransom notes that you aren't able to verify the authenticity of. When a case is this public, clearly you should have the FBI director involved in conversation. So I was just very, very surprised when he said, I've never, not only just with respect to this case, has he never had a conversation with Kash Patel? He said he's never met Kash Patel at all, which again was just very surprising.
Well, it's this case only that makes me surprised about that, because Kash Patel was there. I mean, early in the case, the FBI director was actually in Tucson. He was clear to, us that it wasn't because of the Nancy Guthrie case, that he was going to be there anyway. But obviously, he was there and he met with the, the team that's working this case. And there's been this this joint task force between Pima County Sheriff's Department and the homicide investigators and the FBI local, field agents there. So it is a little surprising, but I'll move on. Okay, there's been a lot of weird stuff in this case.
Just really quickly on the task force point, because I asked him about that as well, because I was trying to get him to quantify or at least make some kind of a comparison between what the task force was like at the very beginning compared to what it is like now. And he was definitely inferring that it has shrunk a little bit, but he did confirm that the core investigative team has remained together since the beginning of the case, which is not surprising necessarily. But we can get into this in a little bit. But he also talked a lot about some of the tactics that investigators have been using in terms of what types of DNA they're gathering and such as well. But again, I'm sure we can get into that shortly.
Well, that's exactly where I want to go because, every one of us has been wondering how much atrophying has happened with that task force. And understandably, in every case, we are past the 6-month mark. Those numbers dwindle. They have to. There are other crimes. There are other, resources that are needed elsewhere. And so I get it. Still curious about how many people are on that force, but interesting
Me
that
too.
the core is still together. So as to what they're doing, early on and then throughout the DNA reporting, the sheriff seemed to only indicate that there was a mixture of DNA, that they're using very sophisticated new technology to try to deal with, but they said little else other than that. And I feel like you kind of got further in what exactly they are doing with the DNA they found in the house.
Yeah, so I was asking him about like the different types of DNA that they were gathering, and he made an analogy. He was like, are we looking at people like the second cousin, which of course was a hypothetical example, but that would mean the forensic familial genealogy, basically, which was, the same kind of construct, if you will, that was developed from the Golden State Killers case. And he had said that everything is on the table. They're reviewing everything, including the familial genealogy side, which I thought was interesting because he's also ruled out, the family from being suspects in the past, the immediate family, that is. So when he said that, I just thought to myself, okay, well, is this opening up, back to the family, as potential suspects? Does that mean they're still reviewing things, even though he has said in the past that the family is totally clear? Which, he didn't directly answer that question either, but I just thought, again, it was an interesting kind of juxtaposition there.
Well, that's one of the things that I've been sort of toiling over for a while, and that is that it doesn't take that long to separate mixed DNA. Otherwise, we'd never, ever solve rape cases. Those are mixed cases. Multiple murders, those are mixed cases. So it doesn't take that long. What does take a long time is the process of forensic genetic familial genealogy. And that's because whatever they found in that house that was foreign, DNA that wasn't supposed to be there, we still don't know if that's the actual killer or the porch guy.
Exactly.
We just know it's a DNA they need to figure out. Who was it? Was it the FedEx guy or was it the bad guy?
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you can get a little piece that can fan out to be thousands of people, all who share that little piece. Then you got to do the lengthy process of gumshoe detective work. You got to find all those people, eliminate them based on, well, this guy's too old and that's a woman, and that guy hasn't left the UK and this guy has never left Mexico, whatever. You limit it down. And then when you get the possibilities, then you've actually got to follow them and pick up a pizza box or pick up a Coke can or a Kleenex. And you've got to test the DNA to find out who's your guy. And maybe that's what he's referring to about the length of time it's taken.
Which I was surprised, because going into that question, I framed it in that way, right? I was like, usually DNA testing doesn't take this long. What's the holdup? And aside from, confirming the familial genealogy side, he didn't really say a lot about the DNA, and he was kind of, punting it off to, I have a team of people in my office who are doing the DNA side. I'm not really involved with that, which I'm not obviously disputing the fact, like, I know he's not, a scientist or an expert in DNA, but usually you would think that he would be briefed to the point that he can say more than that. But it seemed like he was almost using it as a scapegoat to not, give out more information on where things are at with the DNA.
Yeah, possibly. Or quite frankly, the FBI are the masters of this. The local agents usually defer to Quantico, and in this case, they actually went to a phenomenal DNA lab in Florida, and I believe that Quantico could be involved anyway with the results. And then, of course, it's the gumshoe work after that, which could be the local guys. But it is a lengthy process. It is a finite process, though, and it can take months or years. But it usually they get to the end. I mean, they do get to the end of their searches. So it'll be interesting to see what he has to say later. We're at 6 months. How much longer are we going to wait? But talk to me a little bit about the length of time. I mean, Wyatt, every single time I talk to someone on the street about the Nancy Guthrie case, the very first question is, do they think she's still alive? And I know you had a chance to ask Sheriff Nanos what he thinks. That's different than what the public line is, what he thinks. And how did he answer?
So I kind of started it by saying, like, I recognize this is an uncomfortable question because it's almost getting you to tell us, where your investigation is going, kind of. But I said in an interview with Elizabeth Vargas that he had done 5 months ago on News Nation, he said, yes, I believe Nancy Guthrie was still alive. So I put the question to him, and he said eventually that if the family thinks, she's still alive, then so do I. But he also said something that was really interesting, and that was, as the sheriff, what benefit does it do to the public if I say I think she's dead? Which, to me, you wouldn't say that if you think she's still alive. I think he's saying that because he knows that the public sentiment is very much right now that unfortunately she likely, is dead. And so he's saying that because he's trying to satisfy the needs of the investigation while also satisfying the desire from the public to have more information.
He walks a fine line because obviously it's super painful for the Guthrie family. Savannah just came out with her comments, I think, yesterday, and I'm recording this on the 28th of July. But to that end, how is his relationship with the Guthrie family? Talk to me about your questions, that you put to him about his repartee with them and maybe why he's saying, I'm not about to just say she's dead.
Yeah, so I mean, he did say that of like, if the Guthrie family thinks she's still alive, then so do I. But then my follow-up to that was, okay, well, when was the last time that you talked with the Guthrie family? And all he said was he hasn't spoken with them recently. He did make a joke, though. He said she has my contact information. The whole family has my contact information. And then he said practically the whole world does too, including you, referring to me because I reached out to him for the interview. But there had been reports, right, that there was some friction between the Guthrie family and the sheriff's office. There was, some reports as well that had said that Savannah Guthrie was developing her own team, kind of, which he acknowledged in the interview. But he said that he has, quote, zero indication that the Guthrie family is frustrated with law enforcement, which I don't know if that's fair, because I think obviously anyone who was in this unimaginably tragic situation probably would want the pace of the investigation to be moving a little bit faster than it probably is. But I think he just is trying to, stand up for law enforcement and clear his own name as well in all of this, because he's obviously been prone to a lot of criticism on social media by local officials, facing obviously the vote of non-confidence by his own sheriff deputies. So I think, again, he's trying to kind of protect himself while also serving the interests of the investigation.
Ooh, I'm going to ask you that in a minute, because I know you were going to, talk to him about the vote of no confidence and if his guys, how he feels about the fact that his guys don't have confidence in him. But I want to ask you about the early offing, because I'm one of those people who's been extremely critical of this sheriff, because I'm in the business of true crime and I know investigations, and I saw some things early on in this investigation that were a total mess. And that is, within 36 hours, he released the scene. He said, there's nothing to see here. There's no cause for alarm in the community. And we've stopped the search for Nancy Guthrie. And I thought, what the heck were you thinking? Did you press him on those early decisions and whether he now recognizes that they were all really bad decisions?
He, to be honest, what I tried to do was stay away from things that he's been asked about, a bajillion times. And so he had said to the Arizona Republic that he thought the scene was released too soon. But then later he told KVOA that he thought any kind of suggestion otherwise was silly, was the word that he had used. And so the kind of angle that I took with this was highlighting some of the contradictions that he previously had. But I mean, he's acknowledged, of course, several times that some of the early scene decisions may have implicated part of the case. But I think that he, even in the interview, his mentioning of the FBI Director Kash Patel was almost an attempt to try and, again, use it as a scapegoat to take accountability away from his office and put it on somebody else.
I have wondered early and often if they focused on the wrong thing too early and too hard. Early, his guys told me that they had their prime suspect, and it was the brother-in-law. They towed the car of the brother-in-law and his wife, Annie, and they kept it for over 2 months. And I'm wondering if that's why he said the words, there's no cause for concern in the community. We've shut down, the search for Nancy, and we've released the scene. And I'm wondering if, because perhaps they were focusing too much on the brother-in-law, that they missed porch guy, whoever the heck he was.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't actually ask him directly about the brother-in-law for one reason. I was trying to be a little bit strategic in terms of like the behind the scenes of the interview about things that I had seen him get angry about in the past. And I know that he's obviously cleared the family and he wasn't going to say anything too different likely. But he gets quite angry when people ask him about the family members. He gets quite angry when people ask him about his own criticism that he's facing or some of like the local politics in his county there. So my angle with it was trying to ask him questions that I knew would make news depending on his answer, and also balancing that with not making him so angry and egotistical in some ways as well that he would not want to answer some of the other potential newsworthy questions that I had had.
Yeah, I mean, he does have an ego, and that's not me. That's a lot of sources. Many of the people who work for him and people who are no longer working for him say that that is his Achilles, that he just has such an ego and that he's rewarded people on the force with big jobs who weren't ready for prime time. You know, that there were very few people with homicide experience running homicide and running this show. And that's one of the things I wonder, like, you make critical mistakes early on and you may completely blow the case. And here we are 6 months later. Did he say anything about leads? Did he say that leads are still piling in, that they've got thousands to still go through?
I mean, he said that they had slowed down. I asked him if he could quantify that in some way. Obviously, quantifying it in this instance isn't necessarily an exact number so much as just like a general indication. And yeah, he said they have slowed down. But I think the way in which he was trying to provide this answer was acknowledging the truth, and that is, again, that they're not getting nearly as many leads as they were at the very beginning, without making it, you know, a reason to think that the case had gone cold. And so he said, we're getting a fewer amount of leads, but, you know, we're still getting some of high quality. And he was playing this balancing act basically for the whole interview. And so in the context of that question in particular, I pushed him on it a little bit, but I think it goes back to the balancing act and the fact that he's just so nervous that he's going to say something that will just completely upend the integrity of their investigation. And he did rely on that a lot when I asked him questions about the physical evidence, because I asked him about the flower pots that were reportedly near the door and whether or not he thought that they did that for a fast exit. He declined to answer that. I asked him about the blood pattern. You know, was there blood both inside the house?
Wait, go back to the flower pots. How did he decline? Did he say, I'm not going to discuss that? Or did he say, I don't know if the flower pots were left there for that reason? Like, how did he dismiss it? Because sometimes you can get info.
No, he declined because, so on that one and the blood pattern one, both of them together, he declined, saying, I'm not going to talk about anything to do with the physical evidence, which, I mean, I think there was one question that I asked him, I can't recall exactly what it was, but it was a physical evidence question that I had thought he had addressed before. And so then my mind went to, well, maybe he's just refusing to answer any questions at all now on physical evidence, even the ones where he could theoretically give an answer on, because he doesn't want people to, you know, be able to identify which questions he's kind of hiding from and not giving an answer on.
So did you get the feeling that he's answered physical evidence questions before, but suddenly you've asked those ones and he's all
yeah, that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like, I people have asked him. I think you even might have asked him when you interviewed him about the flower pot stuff, right? Like
No,
God, no, you didn't.
Oh, he won't talk to me because I had an interview with him on day one, and after that he hated me because I talked to his guys, and they said we've got our prime suspect and it's brother-in-law, and he was so angry that. Either that I said it or that his guys said it and I said it.
Yeah, well, so I think any of the times I've seen him weigh in on physical evidence, he does it very carefully. But I still thought there was maybe a possibility that he would answer some of those questions because, as you said earlier, we're 6 months into the investigation now. Revealing that type of information, like it could help the public, you know, find leads that could then lead the department to figure out, you know, a potential suspect. Because the way I'm kind of was approaching this interview was, we're 6 months in. The public, as far as most people are concerned, don't really have, you know, much more information than they did on February the 1st when it first happened. And the department really hasn't done very much to reassure the public. He said, even when I asked him, is there a possibility that the suspect is still in the Tucson area, referring to that ransom note that had quoted as outside Tucson, he said, well, absolutely, that's still a possibility. So I think if they haven't even ruled the suspect out of the Tucson area, which is, not a massive area, especially where Nancy Guthrie's home is located. That speaks, I think, to the broader uncertainty with the investigation as a whole.
Kind of feels like they're no further along now
Yeah.
than they were in the very first, few weeks and months of the case, which is really upsetting for, for Savannah's family.
Of course.
To that end, has he said what the trickle or flow of leads is like at this point?
Other than they have slowed down, and other than, talking about how they have received some leads that have helped the investigation, didn't say obviously what those were, but he gave a number of hypothetical examples. He said, he gets leads from people in Ireland, for example, but the case was one reference that he had made. So I think, again, he's trying to highlight some of the examples that make it seem as if they're still getting these really high quality leads, while in some ways hiding from the fact that they really probably aren't getting the high quality leads that they need in order to put an end to this. Because if they were, back to the Tucson thing, I think he would have been able to rule out Tucson, Arizona.
Yeah, I mean, it's a natural that the leads fall off. And, early in the case, the press gets the hammer taken to them for talking too much about the case or being outside on the street, out in front of Nancy Guthrie's home. And then when you get to this point, 6 months, and the leads slow, sometimes to a trickle, suddenly everybody wishes the media was all over it again, and that the leads, would keep coming in, the good ones. Because like you said, some people from Ireland are calling with their ideas or their theories. That's not helpful to the police. They need good leads, which are information that's actionable. And that's the hard part. And it's never a cold case, because I know you mentioned that the sheriff said it's not a cold case. Well, heck no. It's never a cold case until every lead has been run down and there's no longer any more leads. And then they put the shoebox up on the shelf, and then it's a cold case. So this is a long way still from being a cold case. But is there anything that, does he have any regrets? Did you get any notion in your interview that he has any regrets about his part in all of this?
Not really. Going into the interview, I obviously did extensive research, and I had seen some of the ways in which he had treated different people. And I have to say, this isn't my own experience, because he was very gracious with me. But he said it was reported on the Crime Junkie podcast, they were interviewing one of the local reporters, and he had told one of the reporters about a week or two into the investigation, reportedly, that, they shouldn't be messaging him at 9:50 p.m., which in Arizona, a lot of the newscasts there go to air at 10 p.m. So they were trying to...
I think that's Brianna Whitney, wasn't it?
I think so, yeah. I don't recall her name, but I'm sure that's who it is.
She couldn't believe it. What are you talking about?
Well, especially, again, it's one thing if it's a year into the investigation and, the sheriff is probably with his family. It's a week into the investigation, absolutely no leads, right before their newscast. And he obviously, in that instance, didn't feel any remorse telling the reporter to, not message her, or not message him, rather. And so that, I think, speaks to the broader fact of, if someone's doing that, I don't know if they're the type of person who will reflect back and have certain regrets, if that makes sense. And so, I did kind of try and get to that when I was asking him about if he thinks, he should have done more with the Guthrie family. I also asked him if he thinks back to the Nogales and Sonora tips that were brought in, should you have made an earlier attempt to engage with the Mexican authorities, for example? And he got a little bit puzzled. He was like, well, I don't know what earlier or bigger would have looked like. If you can tell me, then let me know.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, which I thought was kind of strange, because
he's asking a 17-year-old.
No, he was very nice. He was very nice. I don't want people to get the wrong impression, but I just thought it was interesting. I think he was kind of talking, as the collective you, so to speak. But I just thought it was weird, because when that tip came in from Nogales about the burial site, I thought, okay, we did an interview about this on my show. And I thought, okay, well, this is the first real tip about her whereabouts that we've received. And my notion in this question was just there seems to be nothing really done to, put this tip to bed or to put it to rest. And so I just thought, maybe there's more tips like this. Should you be engaging with them more? Because we've only heard of that one from Mexico. And he didn't really answer that question either.
That's frustrating, because the Mexican authorities thought it was important enough to dispatch some of their security forces to help that search group. They're a very serious, bona fide search group. Look in the killing fields where they had unearthed 25, unmarked graves before.
Yes.
So the Mexicans took it seriously enough. It's sad that the Pima County authorities didn't jump on that and say, we should jump in here too, and maybe do a team effort and maybe pull on this thread and see if there's more to it. Maybe that'll happen in the future. Who knows? But it is a little frustrating to hear that that's not a big deal to them.
Yeah, I think so. I also think just more broadly about the way in which this investigation is going. They're very much focused on the optics for the sheriff's department, which, I had actually received advice from Brian Enton, and he told me, maybe avoid going to the local politics because he gets very flustered when you ask about that. And if that happens, then, he might not answer some of the other questions that you have. And so I wanted to ask him, though, because the overall optics of the sheriff's department right now, the non-confidence vote and some of his deputies expressing a lack of confidence, there was a few, I think even it was days into the investigation that he was spotted at a sports game, that incident with the reporter. So I just thought to myself, all of these different examples combined, surely there must be some reflection of what could have been done differently. Could you have brought other people into the investigation sooner to help with it? And perhaps most notably, maybe not dismiss people. Don't get me wrong, it's obviously very tragic and very sad for the Guthrie family, but clearing the family's name out of the investigation from the get-go might give the public the wrong picture. And, I think just in general, why aren't we asking more questions, and why are we just trying to put things to rest from the bat in order to save the optics of his own department?
Well, the optics have been the pits, for him. He's taken it on the chin repeatedly, and I think a lot of it is deserved, a lot of it. But how did he respond when you went there about the no confidence vote? Effectively saying, none of your guys has confidence in you. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I actually didn't ask him about that directly, is what I was saying, just because I didn't want that to get away from the newsworthy questions that I would ask.
Did you get in the back door on it, though, and at least try to figure out how he responded to that?
That's where I was going, kind of, right, with the Savannah Guthrie question and whether or not he thinks that the Guthrie family is satisfied with them. Because in my mind, I'm like, if your own deputies don't have confidence in you, how could the Guthrie family have confidence in you, right? And obviously that sounded very, firm and very assertive. So I was hesitant to ask that one directly, just because I thought there's other questions here that might not be as punchy necessarily, but could help move this investigation along. And I think he did do, a relatively good job of answering some of those ones, but it was just this idea that he had just been very dismissive in general of the fact that people in his own office were failing to express confidence, in him at a time when they should be very united. This is the one time that they are being put in the spotlight ever since Gabby Giffords was the last time that they were in the spotlight. He talked about that as well. The Gabby Giffords investigation, he said he was the one leading the investigation into her as well. He had said that it's a little bit different because the investigation into her was less of a kind of who did it type of investigation and more of a corroborating the facts and a motive behind it and everything. But he was drawing some similarities between that and also, making reference to some of the exceptions. He was trying to highlight, I think, that the Pima County Sheriff's Office has been in the news for a lot of bad reasons, obviously recently, with how slowly this investigation is moving in some ways. And so he said, in an effort to, I think, counter that, there was a homicide case recently in Pima County, and he said, in my department, found the suspect and got through with it very quickly within a matter of just a couple of days. And so he, again, I think that goes back to the optics and wanting to paint his department in the best light possible, which, I have to say, the fact that he gave an interview to me and answered some of these questions, I at least give him, some credit, because frankly, it wasn't looking like he was going to do that with a major outlet even for the past little while, because that last interview he did was like an 8-minute interview with the local affiliate station there in Tucson. And so to me, it looked as if he was maybe dodging accountability, but I guess this kind of, for me anyways, made things look like he's willing to answer some questions.
How did it go when you said, thanks for being with me today? How did it go when you wrapped it up?
He said, I don't know if I want to read too much into this or make your viewers read too much into it, but I said to him, thank you so much. That was great. It's very common that I say that after the interview. I want to end on a good note, regardless of how the interview went. And he said, well, I don't know about that. So I don't know if it was like a playful thing for him where he was like, joking about the quality of his responses, or if it was more of a serious, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I answer those questions, right? Like, it was very hard to gauge, but it was definitely a moment that resonated with me, because either way, it's interesting that he said that after the conversation.
Well, I have been on the other end of an interview from you, and I remember being astounded at how much research you did and how much background you knew. It was one of the most researched interviews I've ever actually sat for, so I get it. I don't think he was joking. I think he was gobsmacked by this 17-year-old kid who's, about to become a senior in high school, who really put him to the task. So good job. Congratulations. Very well done. And thanks so much for being on with me. I hope it's certainly not the last time, and I really know it won't be.
Of course. Thank you so much.
My great thanks to Wyatt Sharp. Again, the Sharpe Exchange. You must download. You must join his membership. Do whatever, but watch this kid, because his interviews are amazing. He's literally interviewed almost all of the A-list senators and congressmen, prime ministers of other countries, leaders of other countries. I don't know how he does it, and somehow maintains a 98 average in school. I was not like that at 17. I'm just going to say it. Anyway, thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, everyone, for watching. 1-800-CALL-FBI if you know anything about the Guthrie case, if you know anything about that guy who was seen on the porch camera, if you have heard anything, because loose lips sink ships, and often it happens months after the crime. 1-800-CALL-FBI. I'm Ashleigh Banfield, and the truth isn't just serious, it's drop dead serious.